I'm in the courtroom of the university with Alexander McCall Smith, a prolific and celebrated author who has a devoted following not only in the UK but around the world. And I want to ask you, Sandy, if I may, that to tell us a little bit about the transition, because after all you were a distinguished academic, medical ethicist, you served in international bodies, you had written books for children in the 80s and 90s, and then suddenly there was the #1 ladies detective agency. Now, when did you realize that you really were destined to become a full-time writer?
Well, it was a slow process, because towards the end of the 1990s, I'd written quite a number of books. I'd written short stories, books for children and so on, but I was reconciled to having a fairly small readership, and I thought that that was fine, that was my lot in life. And then I wrote the #1 Ladies Detective Agency, and initially nothing happened, and so it really wasn't until I'd written the third book in that series that it began to take off.
And you realized something was happening?
I realized something was happening. It took off first in the United States, and people were buying it and reading it. And I suddenly realized on a trip to New York, when I went to see my new American publishers and thought that I would be given a cup of coffee at most,
yes,
that something else was in store when they had a large lunch and introduced me.
Well, they don't do that unless...
Well, lunch is illegal in New York, so you don't have...
Well, what's interesting about this is that you've been a passionate reader since you were a child. You grew up on, the great stories that children read. You've always been passionate about writing. What makes the difference when you produce something like the Mara Motswe series set in Botswana? What is it that catches the mind of the reader, do you think?
Well, I think that readers are always looking for something slightly different. And so an author, if he or she is lucky enough to come up with something which is perhaps a little different from what else is available, has a bit of an advantage. I think in the case of those books, there was a certain intimacy in tone, which I hadn't set up deliberately to introduce.
But which came naturally, because it's a country you love, it's a country where you worked, you yourself were born in Africa, in what is now Zimbabwe. So you had a feeling which naturally came through.
Yes, I don't think I could have written those books had I not spent my childhood in that part of the world. And so really, when I had reconnected with it and spent some time there as an adult working in Botswana, I felt that this was something I wanted to talk about, and it all came out.
In the context of publishing and storytelling, and we're here where the Stirling Centre for International Publishing is based, there is something about storytelling which always needs to be emphasized, it seems to me, which is that storytelling depends on simplicity.
Yes, yes.
It's actually a simple process.
Yes.
It's not a simple process to produce a good story, but what it should be in the end is a piece of simplicity.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I think that one has to be very careful not to say too much. One can paint a very deep picture and I suppose a very interesting picture with a few brushstrokes. So I think simplicity, yes, and a story which has a very clear beginning, middle and end is another thing that one has to remember.
Well, also, somebody once said to me, the reader has got to want to turn the page.
Yes.
This is rather basic, but it's true.
Well, also the reader has got to want to spend time with the characters. So the reader has to like at least one of the characters in the book. If you don't like anybody in a book, you actually don't do that page turning.
You have to care.
You have to, yes.
I mentioned, just introducing you, that you're very prolific. You produce books, simultaneously. You were writing books in the 44 Scotland Street series, the Sunday Philosophy Club with Isabel Dalhousie, one of your favourite characters. Doing that at one and the same time, do you feel that refreshing or difficult?
I find it quite refreshing. I very much enjoy my annual meeting with the main characters, but I like to vary that with self-standing novels and other visits to other fictional universes.
Do you always know when you begin a book how the character is going to behave?
No,
they tell you.
Exactly. They develop a mind of their own. And I'm constantly surprised by developments in my books. As I'm writing the book, something will happen that I really hadn't anticipated happening. This occurs all the time. And I think that's because fiction comes from the subconscious mind, that the subconscious mind is making up these stories as
all the while. And when you begin on the you know, on the laptop or on the page.
Yes.
It's all there, really, just waiting to...
It's there, but you don't know it's there.
One more thing I want to ask you, and it's this. What is the importance of storytelling? In this day and age, we live in an electronic age which is quite different from the one that I grew up in and you grew up in terms of books and stories. Why does the narrative still matter?
Well, I think it does various things. It provides a small area of quiet and retreat, which I think people increasingly need in a world in which they're subjected to all sorts of influences and stimuli and all sorts of information. In a novel, you go back to a small corner of the world. That's why Jane Austen is so popular. She talked about painting this little picture on a tiny square of ivory. People want that.
And you did a rewriting of Emma.
I did, I'm afraid.
And
She doesn't need to be rewritten.
And when you went back and read Emma from that perspective, to try to, good heavens, rewrite Jane Austen, what struck you about the way that she had done it? Because you must have thought about it in a different way at that point.
Well, I think when I looked at it in that different way, I realised what a wonderful novelist she is. Well, I already knew that.
Yes.
But it confirmed my judgment as to her skill in that it's perfectly paced, and she very subtly draws one into these various issues that she deals with. And of course she deals with very small matters, tiny little questions, which of course is what people want. They're I suppose a little bit daunted by the very, very big issues. To go to the little points of life is very refreshing for people.
A lot of people will watch this who are perhaps trying to write or think that they may write. And people, it seems to me, often get into a great funk about this and they say, oh, I can't possibly do it. How do I do it? What's the best advice for someone who thinks that they have a story in the head and there's a terrible blank sheet of paper or a blank screen in front of them?
Well, I suppose the first advice one would give is begin. I think
do it.
Yes, do it, and persist. And I think write from the heart. I think that people, if they try to write what they think people are going to want them to write, it won't be authentic. So write from the heart. Have a regime, because writing, as you know, is a very, I suppose, a very firm discipline is required. And persist, and don't be discouraged. And even if something isn't published, you'll feel better when you've finished it.
And of all your characters, Mara Motswe must have a special place in your heart.
Yes. She does. She does, yes. Mara Motswe is a very special person for me. She's present with me a lot of the time. If I'm about to say something uncharitable, there's this voice that says behind me.
She's on your shoulder.
She's on my shoulder. But I also like Bertie. Bertie's
Bertie, the ageless Bertie.
Oh yes, he's had terrible trouble with his birthdays. He's been 6 for 7 or 8 years, but I've recently given him a birthday. But he's a wonderful character, and I love my moments writing about him.
Alexander McCall Smith, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.